Hey there, and welcome to Comedians on Technology, People, and Drugs. I'm your host, as always, Sam Joseph, and today we're very lucky to have a special guest comedian, Sam Joseph, with us. Yes, it's me. I'm interviewing myself due to a last-minute cancellation, but hey, Sam, it's really great to have you on the show. Thanks, Sam. It's great to be here. Now, Sam, you're a very funny person, and I think that many thousands, as we've established now, since we've gone live on YouTube, we're more popular than Joe Rogan. We're more popular than God. Everybody in the universe is now listening to this show, and I think as the host of the most popular show in the universe, I suspect people are really interested to try and understand your origin story. Tell us how it all kicked off. Well, thanks, Sam. I mean, great question. I really, lovely voice that you have. It's, anyway, let's calm down. I'm married. Anyway, but yeah. So, I guess, where did it start? Growing up in the '80s, I was watching things like The Young Ones and like Sorry. I think I just saw an advert or a retro, whatever it is, post for that on Facebook, and yeah, there was. I was sort of addicted to television, really. Like, I think particularly between the ages of like 11 and 15 or so. I mean, and even beyond that, I was just sort of watching everything on television, whether it was just sort of like random quiz shows like Blankety Blank and so on. But I do remember seeing lots of comedy and seeing Billy Connolly, and I've forgotten his name. There's an Irish comedian called Dave something or other, and that was the sort of, I guess, the first stand-up. Jasper Carrott, I remember seeing on television, and yeah, always enjoying those, but never really thinking about that or probably understanding it. And yeah, and then so I kind of got involved in theatre in university, and got quite into that. Got really quite engaged in amateur dramatics at university, and would often have roles that had a little bit of a laugh in them, but wasn't particularly focused on the comedy side of things. I mean, I remember doing a one-man show actually at Leicester University. Yeah, I guess not so insanely different from what I'm doing these days. And so I think then I came to Edinburgh for subsequently more university, and I got really involved in the amateur dramatics. I did like 13 different plays in the course of the first year at university, when I should have been really focused on the masters. I was just really, I guess, addicted to being on the stage, and a lot of those roles were not necessarily particularly big parts. I was just somehow kind of related to the theatre, and not thinking about comedy. But then at the Bedlam Theatre in Edinburgh, they also had the Improverts, so that were theatre sports or what have you. They had like an improv comedy troupe, and I don't think that I ever took part in the sort of, they had like I think, was it a Friday nights, their weekly session. But I started getting involved very occasionally. They would do improvised plays where that's the whole thing would be an improvised thing. And I remember, I think in my general desire to be in everything and be on stage as much as I possibly could, then I would get up and get on stage with that. I don't think I was particularly good as an improviser. I do remember sort of seeing them try and teach some improv. I mean, retrospectively, if I could do my life over again, I wish I could have tapped myself on the shoulder at like at Leicester University at age 19 and say, with the improvised comedy, you don't have to rehearse. Because I mean, I always found that the rehearsal and all this and the other somewhat tedious, and particularly, like being in a play where other people have lines and I have to wait and not say anything while they're speaking. But so partly as a side effect that I was sort of hanging out with people in the theatre, and some of them were these improvisers who were also trying their hand at stand-up comedy. And I had a job behind the bar for extra money in Negotiants, which was I don't know if it's still there, but it's a bar around the corner from the Bedlam Theatre. And I'm not sure how the idea came up, but there was David McCrate, who actually wrote a play called A Play About a Chair, and he wrote it, I think, partly with like one of the characters with me in mind. And that was one of the plays that I was in. I think it was quite well. It's about two politicians who are on opposing sides of some conflict, and they agree to sit in this specially made kind of like chair cabinet thing where they can only open the doors to it if they agree to open the doors together. So it's kind of like you can kind of effectively hold your opposing number hostage, as it were, if you want to carry on talking to them. But if you both agree to say, right, you know, we agree, or we agree to disagree, then you can leave at any time. And yeah, so David McCreight was also doing stand up, and so yeah, I was involved in that project with him, and some other sort of comedy shows. Oh, I'm remembering now. Very funny sort of comedy horror one that we were in, that Andrew Walker was the mastermind behind. I forget the name of the author, but Andrew Walker was the lead guy. But yeah, also very funny. Also, yeah, hysterical guy. But so, hanging around with these stand-ups, we ended up putting on kind of like a comedy show, not so much an open mic as, like, okay, this is us. It was like sort of a group of us, and we were saying, yeah, let's do some stand up in the bar in Negotiations, which had a performance space that like featured bands and things occasionally. And this is actually, I'm just recalling, like my first attempts there. I was emceeing it. I remember David McCreight saying to me, "Why are you not doing stand up?" And I said, "Well, because I'm shit. I didn't have any belief in my ability to do stand up." I also remember actually seeing. I travelled to America a couple of years before then and had seen. I think actually Rick Duckerman is a Canadian stand-up. I think he's passed away now, sadly. I was seeing his special, and just being, like, yeah, this is great stuff. So I started to come into my mind that, oh, this is really, really cool. And so yeah, at the sort of end of this year of doing the theatre a bit too much, over the summer, started running this comedy night. And yeah, and so I was the MC, and I tried out a few jokes. I think one that was verbatim copied from Rick Duckerman, another one which was just me like holding up an advert from a newspaper and saying, "Isn't this weird?" And I just didn't get any laughs whatsoever. And I remember feeling awful, just feeling absolutely awful. That's so unpleasant. And my friends were getting up and they were doing bits of stand up, and some of them were getting laughs. There was one guy whose name escapes me now, but I remember him doing. He had like rollerblades, and he sort of started off to the music of like Carmen or something, and did this incredible sort of rollerblade thing, and then this. Like, I don't know if it was a 5 or 10 minute set or what have you, but I particularly remember, and I think I was, standing back by the bar, and in Negotiations, the sort of, it had the tables, and not everybody was facing the stage. And I remember when he came on, this guy whose name now escapes me, I remember there was a woman with her back to him who just looked really irritated that someone was coming in and starting to do stand up. But it was a great set, and like by the end, he'd completely won her over. And I just, that combination of me trying, little bits of joke telling as an MC, and this other guy absolutely smashing it. I kind of baked in the idea in my mind that, okay, doing this stand up is some special magical thing that only very, very talented people who've got the gift of the gab can do, and I'm just not quite that person. And that corresponded with a time where I was sort of also, there was a lot of politics. I was actually, I think I was the president of the Bedlam Theatre at the time, and there was a lot of politics, and I just, I was supposed to be doing my dissertation over the summer for my master's degree, and I just ended up deciding, right, I can't do the I'm not going to do. I was just a series of sort of unpleasant experiences, and I just thought, I'm not going to do the creative stuff. I'm going to throw myself into the academic world, and that's going to be the path that I will take. And I was sort of 20. Must have been 22, 23 or something, and just said, right, I mean, actually, another thing that happened was that summer I was in the Fringe, not as not doing comedy, but as a play, and I was in Burke and Hare, and we had like probably it was maybe 12, 14 nights that we did as part of the Fringe, and it was that was a very unpleasant experience. The show had two halves, and the second half, well, let's start with the first half. The first half, I was just sort of a bit part on stage, and so Burke and Hare is about these sort of corpse stealers, or ultimately murderers, to get bodies for surgeons in Edinburgh like 150 years ago or what have you. And in the first half, it was sort of like a living room kind of drama sort of thing, and the sort of 14 people that they killed, like, were on stage around the edge, just sort of sitting there. And I was one of those victims. And your job in the first half of whatever, hour-long show that it was, the first half, was just to sit there. And then at one point, when your name was mentioned, you would stand up and kind of like walk, just sort of slowly towards the center of the stage, and then you would just go and sit down again. And so, like, doing that and listening to the same thing over and over and over every night for an hour, 14 times. Oh, I hate it. The second half, much more fun. It was actually outside in a graveyard. I was a lawyer that transformed into a werewolf, the happy days. But it left me feeling, right, I really don't want to be doing more intense theatre, and my sort of attempt to move towards the stand-up had, not, I'd sort of gone down in flames in my mind, and I just thought, right, I'm just going to go into academia, off we go, and didn't really look back. I subsequently moved to Japan, and in Japan, Kim Binstead, who had also been involved in the improvised comedy, was out there as well, and I think she, and then there was also I've forgotten his surname now, but Dave, I've forgotten his surname, but yeah, he actually, a lot of when I was interviewing the comedians working in Japan last year, they remembered him as somebody who'd gone on from improv to really kickstart the stand-up scene. Dave Gutteridge, that's right, in Japan. But so in Japan, there was a sort of an improv group via Dave and Kim, and so I was doing, for a couple of years in Japan, I was doing improvised comedy regularly, and we were even doing it in competitions, and we even did it in Japanese, and we actually won one competition. I was sort of cheating, really, because foreigners being stuck unable to speak Japanese is pretty damn funny. So I feel a bit bad about all the hard-working Japanese improv teams who that was their real thing. We were just doing it as a muckabout sort of stuff. But yeah, so I very much enjoyed doing that improv in Japan, but yeah, there was a couple of professional comedians. I do remember we had this, that was sort of a regular thing, and we were going, and there was, the number of people going to that improv group gradually faded out. There was like fewer of them, and then I remember one was myself and one other guy, and just a Japanese improv teacher. And I remember like we were doing some like quite complicated exercises. I remember at one point saying, "Can we move on from these and do some of the other stuff?" And I remember my fellow non-Japanese American friend afterwards, I think it was Chris, saying that was kind of, this is the thing. I think from an early age, I wasn't, would you say, I don't know, what am I? I'm not necessarily. I'm often opening my big mouth and stepping on other people's toes and not necessarily saying the right thing. But yeah, I sort of recall after that, ending up that improv thing petering out, and then that was it. So many years I had a family. I think always in the back of my mind, there was this idea that one day I'd write some jokes and do some stand up and so on. And it wasn't until about 5 years ago, and my kids had started to grow up, and I'd been like a sort of a football coach for my kids, and that kept me very busy. But I ended up ultimately walking away from that it's closed down for COVID, and I was like, well, actually, that's quite a good excuse to put down, because that was really quite stressful and emotional. But yeah, so it was sort of about 5 years ago. I remember having a bit of a difficult time at work and a bit frustrated, and being in the garden reading an article in the paper about a guy, as a journalist, who tried out a stand-up comedy course, and it was in fact the Amused Moose's comedy course, which is been going for a long time. It's quite famous, and I was just the kids getting to the age where I was just starting to have more free time. Like I might have a free Sunday afternoon, and I was like, oh wow, like that I could possibly go and do such a course, and so I looked it up online. Oh, Amused courses. Signed up for the course. As I was saying to Maggie yesterday, when I found out there was actually a showcase, I had this sort of like, the bottom dropped out of my stomach. But yeah, then did this showcase with a dozen other people. Course run by Marcus Birdman, and I had a whale of a time. Really enjoyed that, and we did the showcase show. And I mean, this was still COVID tail end of, and so the whole audience was masked up, which is a bit strange. But yeah, and I did that first gig and loved it, and I was like, right, immediately I must do more open mics and things and sign myself up for open mic, and then was just right, and I think the majority of, as is often the case, the majority of the people in that course didn't stick with it. I think there's one or two who are still going, but yeah, and I've been becoming more and more obsessed with comedy over the last 5 years, to the point now that I've got my solo show at the Fringe. We're here recording podcasts with comedians on the day they turn up in the Monkey Barrel. Shout out to Monkey Barrel. Yay, Alex the Tech. Yay. Get your podcast recorded here, folks. Great stuff. And like I think I mean, it's interesting being here at the Fringe. It's quite intense. I think I sort of equivocate between, wow, yeah, next year I'm going to do this show, and next year I'm going to do this show, and then also, can I handle this emotionally, and so on. We'll see. To one day at a time, and then I guess, do I need to do a different voice for interviewing myself? Anyway, like as you know, I'm interviewing myself here, and that's it's going solo. It's what I often end up doing. But well, let's move on, shall we, to our second question of how technology is affecting your life in comedy. And as I often say at this point, technology, Big Tent. I mean, it's all the different things. Memory palace, how to remember things, AI, VR, and of course, I think this is now, which episode we're on? I think this is probably 68 episodes. I was sort of thinking maybe for the 100th episode I would try and get somebody to interview me, but it's happened a bit sooner than we've expected, and doing it solo, haha. I've talked a lot about. I mean, I've been just listening back to the Louise Volke episode, where I talked about the virtual reality in some detail. I mean, I guess if I look back at the last 5 years, then and it's interesting to reflect actually. When I first started out trying to do that emceeing or whatever, there was no technology involved. We didn't have camera phones or anything. The idea of recording the set or of the emceeing or what have you, I think even really occurred to us. I mean, I think when I had directed Macbeth at Leicester University, we got that recorded. Of course, I wasn't in there; I was just the director. Occasionally you'd get videos done of things, but it was very technology free at the time. But 5 years ago, when I started that first gig that I did with the Amuse Moose, I recorded that and watched that back. And I mean, as I've talked about on the podcast many times, I mean, I'm a big fan of watching myself back. Really enjoy that. Often, as I say to people, I get that. I think there's a dopamine rush or whatever adrenaline rush you get when you're performing and getting the laughs. And I think then when I listen back, I get that again, and I'm just sort of excited to see what I look like and this, that, and the other. And yeah, it's that's always been fun. It's only just recently that I'm kind of getting to the point where I don't religiously watch everything back, partly because I'm doing so much. I'm just getting sort of pretty tired at the end of the day. Yeah, just take a drink here. Oh, it's exhausting interviewing yourself. You've got to do double time on all the talking, just like doing a show. So and actually that first showcase, I brought my tripod and I actually recorded all of the acts, and said like I could do it for all of us, and then distributed the video of their performance to each of the acts, and everybody was like, "Oh, thanks so much for doing that," and that was my pleasure. And then so what I started doing, so like I did like a year's worth of open mics, and probably did like 100 gigs or so, probably like in the next year. Maybe didn't do that 100 in that first year, maybe in the next 15 months. But so I started doing the same thing, which was like I would video myself, and I would also video everybody else, and I would I just sort of did that and was reaching out to all of the comics that I would see at these open mics, and I realized retrospectively, I mean, that was not. I mean, I was pretty quickly I realized some people were like, they didn't want to be videos. I think they were quite sensitive about that. For me, I sort of assumed everybody would love a video of themselves, so I got into the habit then, obviously, of like in advance saying to everybody, yes, I can video, would you like a video of your set? And for a good couple of years there, I was doing that just at the open. I'm sort of long since stopped doing that from the effort, but when I then started Sunset Comedy in Harrow, I did the same thing, and then we've provided free videos to all of the acts for Sunset. Those who want them, obviously, people can turn down, they don't want to be videoed if they prefer not to. And we delete the videos afterwards. Yeah, and I think that's been. I mean, partly there's a little bit self-serving. Is that I love offering people something, and then it's also an opportunity to connect with those people online, as we've talked about on the show many times. There's a lovely community of people doing comedy, and I love the excuse to reach out and say, hey, here's a thing, and then maybe that leads to a chat, and that's been really nice. So I think the recording of it, fantastic. Yeah, then a big period of using the VR, which we've talked about before. Actually, when I first started out, I was using an augmented reality headset to actually see my set list kind of appear in front of my eyes. Kind of ditched that after about 6 or 7 gigs as just being, not too ridiculous. And now, yeah, like the, writing on hand, or I'm trying to move on from the writing on hand. Actually, I haven't used that very much. Actually, the first day of the Fringe, and I last minute gig, I ended up writing on my hand. But now, like for example, with my show, and I've got my 50-minute show, and that's just locked in. I've got sort of like effectively bullet points that I go through in my mind that allow me to do the show in approximately the right order each time. Getting a bit obsessed with the old social media. So easy to get stuck scrolling, particularly during festivals when you're sort of trying to connect with people and so on. We've talked about this many times. And the AI, I mean, I have spent quite a lot of time trying to get AI to tell better jokes. I think I've had some success with it constructing actually novel jokes. I don't know that any of them are so fantastically funny. It's but the thing that I do with social media at the moment, I'm doing with my show, is that I do this free drink offer, and I was doing that actually for the first couple of years that I was gigging. Is that I had a deal where if people would see my show and follow me on social media, then I would buy them a drink after the show. And that was when I was sort of had a good contracting job, and then I lost that job and I couldn't afford to buy people drinks anymore. And but now I've just reinstated that here in the Fringe because I've got a reasonable job and I don't drink myself, so But I absolutely love after a show being able to go to the bar with some people from the show and buy them drinks. And there's a self-serving thing there of I'd love to get the followers on Instagram. Also love to be able to chat to the people on the Instagram in the following days, and I've had lovely reviews, I think, off the back of that as well. And so what's remarkable is about these different layers of like connectivity. Like Instagram seems to be the poison of choice for many people, but it can be very difficult to actually connect with people, because when you message somebody, it gets rather than it immediately appearing, it gets held in this kind of like message request thing, so people often don't see it. I've used all of this tech. I've used AI to do a lot of the coding for the booking site that we have for our shows, Crack Up Comedy and Hilarity, all the Hilarity Unlimited shows, Crack Up Comedy and Sunset Comedy. And yeah, it's just a remarkable change around of things. But one of the things there is trying to like actually connect with comedians. And of course, people I think are sensibly reticent to give out their phone number for WhatsApp. I mean, gradually as I make really good friends with certain comedians, we start to have each other's numbers and so on. But the broad majority of people, you're kind of contacting them via Facebook Messenger or Instagram Messenger, and it can be a bit hit and miss about whether you're actually connecting with people. But yeah, I think I'm very overall I'm very technology positive. It's maybe I'm a bit obsessed with watching and listening back to myself. At the same time, I think there's, as I've said on the show before, I think I've moved from a very detailed analysis of everything I do to kind of just watching it back to get additional exposure. I mean, they say that for mastery of anything, you need to do 10,000 hours. And if you think, if you're going to do 1,000, like even you do 1,000 gigs, which I think is I'm probably beyond 1,000 gigs, but a lot of those will have been fives and so on and so forth. So really, I mean, you need to do like 10,000 gigs of an hour each, and that if you started when you were 20 and you were managing to do an hour's actual stage time a day, which is maybe if you shot up and you could you were multiplying that up. If you imagined, let's say that you did 5 days a week, 50 weeks in the year, that's 250 over the course of 4 years. That would be like 1,000. That would be, I mean, you'd basically need to go from 20 to 60, really, gigging really intensely to actually get up to 10,000 hours of stage time. So, I mean, even the number of people who've managed that is probably pretty rare, but there's very successful comedians who've clearly got less than 10,000 hours of stage time. But I think that there's a kind of, at least the story I tell myself is that if I if I watch back my show, if I do an hour show, if I watch that back, I'm kind of, that effectively I'm kind of getting 2 hours for the 1 hour, to try and move myself towards further mastery. I mean, I guess that's the funny thing about comedy is about this desire to get better. I mean, I guess that maybe happens with almost anything that you do. I don't know, like. Yeah, I mean, we did virtual golf, the other thing, but I don't find myself really impassioned about getting better at golf. I mean, it's nice to be good at things. I guess it's when you find something that you really like doing. I don't know, but it's interesting, isn't it? Because you could, I mean, for example, I quite like running and swimming and cycling. I mean, I do triathlon, but I'm not quite so obsessed about getting better at that. I'm not, kind of like going absolutely nuts trying to sort of sink every spare moment of the day into that in the way that I'm doing with comedy. It's very strange. Yeah. Well, anyway, let's move us on to the people that have had the biggest impact on my life and comedy. And yeah, and so what can I say? Biggest impact. I mean, I think, shout out to Stuart Murphy, who I just met here again at the Fringe for the first time in 30 years, doing a fantastic improv show. And I mean, if anybody's got 10,000 hours of improv experience, Stuart Murphy. I mean, he was in the improv group that I met at the Bedlam Theatre, and so I really wish I had followed his path and kept on doing the improv consistently over 30 years, because it's an absolutely sublime and beautiful thing when done well at his level. And I think his early attempts at stand up, I remember informed me very strongly. David McCrate, yeah, for getting me involved in those shows and sort of saying, why aren't you doing stand up? Yeah, they're big early influences. I mean, I already mentioned Billy Connolly, and now Dave Attell is a very funny American comedian who I remember living in America. I would love watching his show. I think it's called Late or After Hours or something, and didn't actually contain that much of his stand up, but it was basically about him. He would go to different cities and do stand up, and you'd see 30-second clip of his stand up, and then he would wander around the town at 2, 3, 4 a.m. being unable to sleep, and just sort of meeting and finding out what people were doing in the middle of the night, and that was fantastic. It was this Irish comedian, who was on the television in the 70s and 80s, was an influence. But that's just reminding me of, also, that was actually one of the things that I missed out of the kind of origin story, is that, so after Japan, we moved to Hawaii, and I remember in Hawaii, I was seeing the show on the television, Last Comic Standing, and I think actually I was seeing the first series of Last Comic Standing, maybe in 2005, 2006, and watching that on the television and being, very interested in that. And I think there was a comedian in that called Dogstar, and they were showing the kind of, what are they called? The kind of audition things, where they were auditioning large numbers of comedians to be on the show. And he kind of was there as a kind of outtake reel of just being not very funny at all. And they were, and it was sort of a bit of a joke. But then, so they were doing these auditions in lots of different cities throughout the US, and he would follow around and kind of re-audition in Atlanta and in Los Angeles and so on, and be not very funny each time, but oh my goodness, incredibly persistent. And then they had like sort of the fifth one, and he was there like in Boston again, and it actually managed to get a couple of laughs from the people who were doing the audition, and they gave him a chance. I mean, I don't think he progressed particularly through the show, but I just remember being really impressed with the persistence, and they had a little shot of him like calling his mum to say he got on the show and so on. And I think that was my comedy curiosity was being that the fires of my comedy yearnings were being stoked by seeing shows like that. People often ask me who my favourite comedians are. I think, there's so many, and I listen to huge amounts of audio comedy on Spotify. Tom Papa is great. Ryan Stone, lots of American comedians that I've discovered by listening on Spotify. Mark Moran, Carl Kinane. I think particularly recently, I sort of re-listened to all of Carl Kinane's and Mark Maron's albums on Spotify, and just really, really, really enjoy those. In the UK, Dylan Moran. I remember seeing Dylan Moran at the Fringe 30 years ago and thinking he was very, very funny then. Love his work. And Eddie Izzard, yeah. And I remember I moved back to the UK, when the kids were a bit younger, and YouTube coming through, and then starting to watch comedy specials on YouTube, like Dylan Moran and Eddie Izzard, and just sort of being, how can they remember this 2 hours worth of stuff? It's incredible, and they're so funny, and they're so in the moment, and so on. But I just sort of, that was the big thing for me. As I've said on the show before, I always thought people were just sort of making it up as they went along, and didn't realise, you sort of practice and hone and craft and so on, which I still love doing just sort of improv random stuff. My virtual reality show, of which I did like 313 episodes, was all improv all the time, and I do love doing improv. But other people had a big impact. My mother and father. I think my dad was always pretty funny. They both passed on. Missed them both. And then is there anything else? Shout out to Alex Irons, who suggested starting Sunset Comedy. And having a lot of fun collaborating with Ollie Miller and Dylan Harris and Hannah Lloyd Davies. Have I said that? I'm getting a bit confused. Anyway, but Hannah and Ollie and Dylan collaborating in their End of Reason show on 4 p.m. every day in the Fringe at the West Side Radio, just down the road here from Monkey Barrel. Is there anybody else I should be mentioning on the really having a big influence on me? Big shout out to Marcus Birdman for the original comedy course. Yeah, I think that's about it. So, well, on to our penultimate question. It's about how drugs affect my perception of reality. Yeah. Well, I do. I think from the age of about, I remember, my first, and of course, as I always say, be careful out there, folks. There's all sorts of substances. You've got to be careful what you put in your body. And by drugs, of course, we mean big tent. Could be prescription drugs, could be illegal drugs, legal drugs, caffeine, alcohol, and so on. Growing up in my household, would always drink tea. Didn't really like coffee. I'm a regular tea drinker. It doesn't even really feel. To me, tea and green tea, as black tea and green tea, which some people say has got a lot of caffeine in it, never seems to have had anything like the effect on me as caffeine. So, but yeah, that's just sort of been there in the background. And it's even like some people occasionally say they'll give up tea or they'll do decaffeinated tea, and that doesn't make, I don't know. Yeah, that's sort of like a baseline for me. But I think at about 16, I started drinking like cider in the park with friends. And actually, I remember the bowling alley in Harrow, they had a bar in it, and we would be bowling there at 16, and we started to like sort of like just surreptitiously, like 2 or 3 or 4 of us would go in, and this is back, they weren't carding or anything, and we would start to drink pints there, and start to sort of experiment with alcohol. And I always quite enjoyed the alcohol, and getting to university in the 90s, alcohol was such like just a central. I mean, it was I don't know that it was every day, but certainly like Friday, Saturday, and so that regular regular hangovers, quite a lot of drinking. Just that was just what you did. That's what you did, and it was very cheap at the time, and that was your entertainment. And I mean, I remember in Edinburgh actually, and that sort of carried on. I mean, the drinking carried on for many years. I remember in Edinburgh, and getting counselling after my parents had got divorced, and I think I showed up for a counselling session, a bit hungover. And I remember them asking me, they said, "Is the alcohol part? Is that part of what you're struggling with?" And I said no, and I felt very confident for many years that alcohol wasn't a problem for me. It was something that I regularly used, but it was, it wasn't out of control. It wasn't like I was carrying a hip flask and needing to have, draws on it 6 times a day. It was just something that I was a social drinker. I was a social drinker, and socially drank too much on many occasions. Ultimately leading to, I think, during lockdown, and I was starting to drink by myself. And as I've talked about on the podcast many times, taking up comedy, then I sort of quit the alcohol. And alcohol, I guess, was always a sort of like a relaxant. I mean, I can think back to so many situations going out and drinking with people and feeling nervous and awkward to begin with, and needing that first drink to kind of go down before we would all relax and start talking normally and just feel okay. Gosh, the dependency. But yeah, other substances started to come in. I started to drink coffee. Didn't really get into coffee that much, I think, until ultimately, kind of the Starbucks wave that came in, which I was in Japan for, and started to drink all of those espresso based things. Yeah, but there was dope. There was weed, marijuana at university, and yeah, I mean, it was weird. I used to like hang out with other people got the gear, the ganja, and I would sort of hang out, and I would sort of the joints would be passed round, and I would take I wouldn't actually inhale. So I think I was sort of like smoking dope at university for a good year or so, and never actually inhaled it. And there was one day I felt like, okay, I actually went down and actually had that. Okay, and then so I remember coming to Edinburgh, and certainly during Edinburgh, just then combination of dope and alcohol, and yeah, it was in terms of like perception of reality. It was just sort of, I mean, it's sort of what was everybody was doing, or at least the people I was hanging out with were doing. But I started to have, I mean, maybe it was even stronger gear in Edinburgh. I started to have like quite bad anxiety attacks on the dope, and it started to become less and less pleasant. And I just ultimately didn't want to do that anymore, and took that sort of effectively, yeah, just like completely cut that out after university. But I mean, probably the most interesting experience, I don't know if I've mentioned, was doing mushrooms in a trip to America, where, if I mentioned that, is where kind of like the whole of reality sort of ceased to exist. And yeah, I don't know if I've talked about that on the show before, but yeah, they were like, this was in Alabama, where I was there for the summer, and there was one time we went camping by a lakeside, and they'd basically been brewing up all of this juice, and I drank like a half-liter bottle of Kool-Aid mixed with mushroom juice, and yeah, I remember being in this tent, and the tent kind of dissolved. It felt like, and I was looking at the stars, and I felt like my body was dissolving, and I just sort of like dissolved into the ground, and then I kind of reincarnated, and I had a notepad and pen, and I was sort of like drawing a diagram of the world and saying, this is when, like, saying my name is Sam Joseph, and kind of like reconstructing myself. And I think the other guys came back and found me sitting in the middle of this tent, surrounded by pieces of paper describing who I was. I remember looking at a watch and kind of like thinking, I used to know what this did. Like the whole concept of it had gone. So that was a really interesting and weird experience. And I think there was a couple of times when people, I think we were supposed to have had something that was LSD or what have you, but never really, never. I don't. I mean, I think it was just dud stuff. I never really had much of an experience on that, but yeah, it's. I mean, perception of reality. I mean, I think it's just so strange. I mean, I've had much more interesting experiences, I would say, meditating. I mean, I did a week-long Vipassana course. What was that? 3 years ago now. Spending like 5 or 6 hours a day, completely silent and motionless. That was really interesting. That really changed how I was looking at things. And actually, for probably a year afterward, I was meditating an hour a day, and it's kind of calmed down to like 10 minutes a day now, and I don't. It's not really structured anymore. I just sort of like allow my mind to wander, and sometimes I just say if I fall asleep, I fall asleep. But yeah, yeah. So these days, I mean, I'm kind of it's decaf coffee. I mean, basically since the start of comedy, 5 years ago, I cut the alcohol out and then followed with the caffeine, and I've also quit loads of things, including painkillers and so on. As I think I was probably saying recently on the show that yeah, it felt like I was in this sort of cycle of like drinking a bit too heavily, and then the next morning needing to like overly caffeinate, and then painkillers and so on to manage it. And it just, yeah, I think I just generally feel better in myself now, not drinking alcohol. I will now. I mean, this influenced by Eckhart Tolle saying that you can have an occasional drink of wine. I do occasionally let myself have wine or champagne or what have you. I mean, I don't drink beer anymore because partly, don't want the calories. So, yeah, I mean, I'll allow myself to have, an occasional martini and so on now. And I find that doesn't lead to a hangover. It's just if it's just one or two. So, yeah, that's fine. And yeah, I mean, I will occasionally. I mean, let myself had a feeling so very tired. Third, fourth day of the Fringe yesterday had an americano, and that wasn't too bad, and didn't seem to like completely, as it's interesting again. Same with marijuana, with coffee, with different kinds of alcohol. On a given day, in a given moment, it can affect you very differently. But my perception of reality, oh, I mean, I'm so keen to sort of like experience this ego death idea. I was just listening back to the episode with Louise W recently, in which we're talking about how she had a ego death reading a book about soil for 8 hours, and Paul Foot, who's here, and a comedian at the Fringe, and Eckhart Tolle and so on. But yeah, I mean, it's a really one of the things I really start to, is it believe is the right word, but that our stories about ourselves are kind of a construction, that we have this incredibly rich experience of our lives, all this sensory information coming in that like, I mean, you certainly can't recall, if you pick a particular day, oh, what were you doing on the 22nd of September 2006? Yeah, who knows? Like, there was all of that there was a full day's worth of experience, and if you try to like video that full day, that'd be loads of gigabytes, terabytes of data is sort of coming in and being impinged on you, and then your perception of the world is kind of like you pick and choose from that. It's a lot more like the process of making a film. They film loads and loads and loads of stuff, and then like, majority of it ends up on the editing room floor, and then you've got these tiny pieces that are used to construct and create a narrative. And I'm sitting here in the Monkey Barrel podcast studio, and they've got like a little board up, and I don't know, it's just changed today, because yesterday it had like a far denser set of older posters, and looks like it's sort of a new kind of set of things is up there. And I've noticed that there's a small kind of like, medium-sized teddy bear with horns and, what is that? That's swimming goggles on there, and hadn't noticed that before. He's holding a rugby ball and is sitting next to a shuttlecock. I mean, there's all sorts of things going on in here. There's sort of plants, which are, presumably, are they? Oh, I think they're made out of plastic. Yeah, there's like the whole of and a lot of reality is like, we think of reality as just like, oh, it's just boring and plain, but it's all about what you choose to focus on. So, well, I think that brings us nicely, perhaps, into the final question in this remarkably non-narcissistic, self meets self episode. Yes, I mean, God, it's a beautiful to be able to just talk to yourself, get an intelligent conversation for once. Ha 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 ha. But yeah, so what does it all mean? This life, this universe, this everything, the big question. And yeah, I mean, yeah, it's it's just I'm so influenced by listening to Eckhart Tolle's ideas on repeat. It was so lovely to meet Maggie S yesterday, who'd already encountered Eckhart Tolle, and I've been a bit like, sometimes I kind of mention Eckhart Tolle or try to introduce him to people. Like so in fact, Eckhart Tolle, this sort of spiritual author promoted by Oprah Winfrey. In fact, my mother bought me, and shout out to mum, big influence on my life, obviously. But for my wedding, she bought me The Power of Now, and which as a present, which some people are like, oh, that's a bit weird. I think it meant a lot to her. I mean, it's all about living in the moment, and I think she really enjoyed reading that book, and wanted me to have it, and so I've still got that copy of The Power of Now, with her, even though she's passed on. With that, she's sort of like, with love, to Sam in the front of it. And that was, I got married like 25 years ago, and I read that book, and it was really engaging then. I read it like 10 times over the following 5 years, and it's just such an interesting book and world perspective, and it talks about the inner mental life in a way that certainly I had not at the time encountered anybody else talking about those kinds of things. Subsequently, I think there's Ram Dass and Alan Watts, and actually there's lots of other spiritual thinkers who say similar sorts of things. So it's not unique in that regard, but it's and I think it's easy for some people to dismiss Eckhart Tolle as sort of pseudoscientific or what have you. But one of the things that he does is he talks about that experience of the inner mental life in a way that no scientists that I'm aware of talk about. The kind of, like the talking about how thoughts kind of like take over your experience of the world. Like if you focus like outwards, you can kind of fill your consciousness with your sensory experiences. So as I was describing these different, interesting and fun elements in the podcast studio here, and when you're focusing on those external elements, your kind of internal noise dies down. But then, for example, one of those elements, like I can see there's a white and Mackie bottle of whiskey up there, or there's a train spotting, and a hat, and so on. Best blooper, the golden, some kind of award on the side here. You can like bounce off some stimulus to start thinking, oh, whiskey, I used to really enjoy whiskey. Oh yes, I'm remembering during COVID where I was getting through a bottle of whiskey every couple of days, and so you can kind of then end up very like inside your head, and that and it's easy to almost like lose connection with the outside world or what's happening because you're just thinking in your head over and over and over and over and over and over. And sometimes those thoughts are nice, and sometimes they get sort of stuck. And in this sort of self-criticism thing, and they're like all of that, like the way that Eckhart Tolle talks about that experience and about trying to manage that experience, just really rings true. I mean, then of course there's nothing scientific about that. I mean, maybe you could construct, good psychology experiments to manage that. But yeah, like that's. I certainly find myself kind of like running away with my thoughts, and can get into sort of an unpleasant place. For example, thinking about, oh, where am I going with my career? How is the comedy going? How is my family okay? All of these sorts of things, and sort of being at peace with yourself, which I think is probably what is, who wouldn't want to be at peace with himself? I guess we're all, at different degrees, sometimes at peace with ourselves, sometimes anxious. How do we manage all these things? Yeah, and so I'm sort of, that's maybe the gateway drug into Eckhart Tolle. And then he talks about this worldview, which I mean, he says he has as a result of having effectively switched off thinking and just like sort of being present in the moment for so many years, that he talks about this sort of like one consciousness of the universe. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's a lovely feeling that you can get if you focus on your inner body, which is another thing that he says. Like if you just focus on the sensations in your hands, and that's I mean, it's really, and then you can even sort of just focus in the sensations throughout your body, and that's kind of lovely if you can stay with it, and actually can be really helpful for going to sleep. And you can also then sort of get this sort of feeling of, is it a feeling of connectedness? I don't know. But there's Eckhart Tolle starts talking about that as kind of like a sort of a kind of God consciousness, like, and from like Buddhism, this idea that separation is an illusion. Like we're sort of like evolutionarily programmed by our DNA to treat ourselves as separate from the rest of the universe and more important than it, and that's kind of necessary for the propagation of the genes, who are the sort of puppet masters. But the reality is that we're made, like I'm sitting on this sofa here, and we're all made out of the same atoms and molecules. And like some of these molecules in this sofa will have been people in the past. I mean, there probably not enough dried skin on it, but that sort of thing. And in fact, all of the molecules in the in my hands and in the sofa and so on were all created, according to the latest scientific theories, were all created in supernovas. Yeah, I mean, many of the complex, not molecules, but atoms would be like everything above. I think carbon has to have been created in a supernova, and so it's like we're this really extraordinary, strange dance of molecules, and that's I'm the molecules in our body are changing over. You put food in each day, and you excrete the waste, and to a certain extent, the form stays the same, but the molecules keep changing, which is pretty weird. And so there's this sort of like strange molecular dance. I mean, Eckhart Tolle talks about it as kind of like we're sort of, it's realizing that you're a ripple on the ocean, in the way that the ripples don't really have an existence separate from the ocean. They're just sort of like formed from the molecules of the ocean, but the molecules are still there. And so it's a lovely analogy in that, all of the forms that we sort of perceive and interact with, and all of the elements of ourselves, they're all just elements of the universe in this sort of continual dance. And we're kind of like creating this narrative about ourselves. It's this very strange thing that humans do, is we pick and choose from the different experiences we've had in our life and the different ideas we've had, and say, oh yeah, I'm this kind of person, and this is the thing that I like, and this is the thing that I don't like, and these are my memories, and this is who I am. And it's kind of, after a while, you kind of end up feeling like that's how you are, and it's difficult to change. And I think we all know people, as they get older, seem like they potentially find it more and more difficult to change. They get stuck in their ways. But in principle, all of this stuff is plastic. All of this stuff is flexible, and you could restructure the narrative of your life by choosing to focus on different particular things. So to me, like the perception of reality, life, the universe, everything, it sort of seems like in principle you can make it what you want to be. I mean, easier said than done, but by kind of reinforcing certain experiences, and like by choosing to not interact with some people and prefer to interact with other people. Of course, I mean, a lot of the literature suggests that even those choices that we're making, it's kind of an illusion. I mean, I guess I'll finish up with an analogy that I might have mentioned on the podcast before, but it's about the man riding the elephant. And it's kind of like the way humans are, that we are like a small person riding atop an elephant, and the small person can speak and say, oh yes, we're going this way because we're hungry. And the elephant is your kind of subconscious, and it's decided it's hungry. It's now taking you in that direction. And actually, a sort of like conscious awareness of ourselves is a lot more like a press officer than it is the CEO. Like the kind of the hidden depths of yourself, all of the urges and needs and desires and wants and whatever are kind of going on, and then that conscious sort of narrative in the head, which we presume other primates don't have, other animals don't have, is sort of a particular human thing, is that we're all got this sort of press officer, this kind of guy who's riding atop the elephant saying, oh yeah, no, I did that because I felt I really needed to do that and what have you. And it's sort of, it's an after the fact narrative, and that's where we start talking about meaning and these sorts of things. And I think maybe if we kind of realize that it's all after the fact, and that we are ourselves bigger and part of something greater, that we can take that the chatty guy on top of the elephant a bit less seriously. Well, there we go. Guys, they said it couldn't be done. I've yet to hear a podcast where the host interviews himself, but you heard it here first, folks. It's probably time to move into promoting the guest stuff. I mean, it has been, Sam, a fascinating conversation. I mean, I think the tech Alex woke up a couple of times during that. You know, he wasn't snoozing the whole time. We'll see. It's great to have at least a sort of a pseudo audience. But so, yeah, so what's going on with me? Yeah, as I've mentioned in this series of live Fringe podcasts, I've got my show that's I Think I'm Turning Japanese, I Really Think So Not, is on at the Cave Spare Room every night from 9:05. We've had 3 shows, been great. That's actually been really great fun. It's a really great room. And yeah, I'm also in The End of Reason. I've got a special guest star ring role in that. That's every day 4 p.m. at the West Side Radio, also on Cowgate. And yeah, we've got more podcast episodes. Hopefully, all of the rest of the guests turn up, because I don't want to have to interview myself. Much as I loved interviewing myself this time, I don't want to have to interview myself again. But let's see. And yeah, other things going on. I'm going to be in the New Comedian of the Year competition heat on Thursday, the 10th of September. It's my last. I mean, you know, I'd never been in that competition before, but apparently you can only do it if you're less than 5 years in. So it's actually going to be my only opportunity for that. We'll see how that goes. And we've got our regular gigs in Watford. That's Cracker Comedy, and in Harrow, Sunset Comedy, Mondays and Fridays going forward. And yeah, I mean, I've got Joke Wranglers, which I'm really excited about. I just pushed the 5th episode on the socials. That was really great fun. We'll be doing loads more Joke Wranglers. That's 2 teams of 2 comedians, each going up against each other in 10 rounds of joke challenges. Lots more fun to be had there, and I'm hoping to bring that to festivals next year, along with my subsequent show that I'm planning, Hawaii 5-0 with kids. Yeah, it's all go. Let's as long as I can survive this Fringe. Big thanks to Alex and Monkey Barrel Comedy for taking this and providing the space. Come and sit. I saw by Mike Rice at Monkey Barrel, absolutely fantastic. Come and see Monkey Barrel. Give them all your money and your love. And as I say, thanks to everyone out there listening. We do have everybody in the known universe now constantly listen to our show on repeat. You know, sorry if my voice is under great. And remember, you can help support comedians on technology, people, and drugs by leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts and by following us on Spotify, where you can ask questions and add comments. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear your answers to these questions. And if you're a comedian out there, get in touch. We'd like to have you live on the podcast, also on YouTube, because we do everything. And we look forward to being in your ears again soon. Last word to our fantastic guest, Sam Joseph. Okay, damn, I totally didn't prepare anything for that. What would be the last word? Let there be darkness.